invitation to sit on this stool is very great, but I'm going to stand. So we have a hard stop at 8:30 here in the Keys room, so I want to make sure we get started on time. Thank you all for coming out to this will be our third public forum on the MBTA community zoning requirements. We're trying to do these forums every month for a couple of reasons, to make sure that everyone in town that wants an opportunity to learn about this has that opportunity, and then an opportunity for us to get feedback and share new information and new developments as they're coming out. So just to start off, my name is Tim Zerwinski. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development. This is Josh Eckert-Lee. He's the Assistant Town Planner. We are going to be recording this meeting. We're recording it in a little bit of a punk rock way. You'll notice we don't have our heroic friends at Milton Access Television here with us tonight. What we do have is the owl. The owl here is a 360 camera. It's looking at me right now, and it's looking at you at the same time. And then it picks who it wants to focus on, usually the person who's talking. It's why Josh is going to be kind of hiding behind the laptop here, so you just don't see the great and wonderful Oz as I'm trying to give a presentation. We're doing a Zoom right now, but it's not a public Zoom. It's just by virtue of being able to record, and we're going to use that as the recording and share it. So it's a little bit of a multi-tiered effort, but we want to make sure we record these things and we can share them afterwards. It's just not going to be as slick an operation as we usually get from METV, who are obviously the professionals in this regard. So tonight, you know, I'm doing the introduction right now, so we're off to the races. I'm going to give a brief recap of what the MBTA community zoning requirements are. If you've been to one of these before, or if you've reviewed the material on our website, hopefully this is all very boring to you. If this is your first meeting, hopefully you've learned something. And what I would encourage you to do is, when we get to the question and comment period, please do not be afraid to ask even what you think may be the most basic questions about these, about this law and these requirements. We want to make sure that everyone is kind of being kept up to speed as we go. I'm going to ask Josh to come up and briefly talk about some results of a survey that we've been doing. Since we started this public process, we've had a survey that has been on our website. We've distributed it a couple times. We've updated it a few times to add new questions. It's going to be an ongoing thing just to continue to gauge, public opinion and to learn a little bit more about what people think about how the process is going. And as we start to refine our zoning districts and refine, our kind of compliance strategy, we're going to continue to ask more questions. So we've got some results I think that are pretty interesting that we'll walk through. After that, we're going to give an update on the technical assistance that we've been getting. The state and other sort of state affiliated actors have been really, really interested in helping communities, do this thing right. And so we've been able to avail ourselves of technical assistance resources from the Regional Planning Agency, from other consultancies to help us work through the very complicated process of complying with these laws. So we don't have a ton of new material from our technical assistance partners, but we do have some updates. And as I said, we're doing these sessions monthly. It's a standing item every 2 weeks on the planning board agenda. We've got a website that we're just blasting stuff out to whenever we get it. So we're just trying to keep everyone updated as close to real time as we can. We've got a follow-up on some of the survey results and some of the public comments that we've been getting. There's been a few consistent kind of questions and comments that we've had that we want to provide some additional information and data on relative to the status of transit in the town of Milton via the Mattapan trolley, and then some information about school impacts, which has been, what you'll find, spoiler alert, is one of the top concerns that people have about multifamily zoning based on our survey. So we've got a little bit of data on that and some more information that we can share. And then finally, question and comment period. I'm going to try to get through 1 through 5 as fast as I can. Again, we've got a hard stop at like 8:20 so that we can clear the room and our fine friend at the library can go home. So I want to try to leave as much question and comment as we can while also getting through all the information that we can. And then finally, I'll just preview the next steps. Our next public forum is scheduled for July 17th, probably at 7 p.m. That's going to be remote. We've done the past 2 in person. We did one at the Council on Aging. We're here today at the Keys Room. I think our sentiment was during the summertime, you know, if you're out in sunny Truro or wherever people go in July, you know, maybe you don't want to come back to Milton for a meeting, but you could fire up the old laptop for, you know, 45 minutes. So we'll be doing that one remotely. Hopefully we can get some good participation through that. So just again, to repeat myself, 8:20, we gotta cut it and get out of here. And then July 17th, we're gonna have our next public forum. So just to remind everyone, the department page for the Department of Planning and Community Development at townofmilton.org. If you just go, you see that menu that says departments. We have a MBTA community multifamily zoning requirement link on the left side of the page. It's actually no longer the top link. We actually have a link to affordable housing lottery. That's the top link, but it's the second link. It's there on the left side. The recording for this meeting will be posted there. The slides will be posted there. And it's got a lot of other really good information from the state and also archives of materials that we've put together and previous presentations. There's also an option to sign up for our email list. Josh maintains that email list. Bless you. We are always trying to send out information to that list. So information on meetings, information on you know, any new developments, any new guidance from the state will go out to that email list. So you should definitely sign up. And there's also a link to our survey if you haven't already done the survey. So briefly, for everybody, those that have seen this before and those that may be new, in January of 21, the state legislature amended Chapter 40A, which is the Zoning Enabling Act. Every city and town, except for the city of Austin, in the Commonwealth is sort of enabled to do zoning by Chapter 40A. The legislature added a new Section 3A, which is commonly referred to as the MBTA Communities Law. You may hear interchangeably MBTA Communities, Section 3A, they're the same thing. And it's basically a requirement that if you are a statutorily defined MBTA community, and there are 175 of them, and they're defined by the level of service that they get from the MBTA, you've got to create at least one zoning district, a reasonable size, in which multifamily housing, which is defined in statute as 3 or more units, is permitted as of right and meets the following criteria. The minimum gross density of the entire district is 15 units per acre. It's not more than a half a mile from a commuter rail station, subway station, ferry terminal, or bus station if applicable. No age restrictions and suitable for families with children. And this is all paraphrased from the statute, but these are the statutory requirements. The penalties for noncompliance defined in the law are ineligibility for 3 major grant programs that the state has, MassWorks, Housing Choice, and the Local Capital Projects Fund. These are major grant programs. The town has a spotty history with all of them in terms of our participation, you know, including Local Capital Projects Fund, which is actually it's not a competitive grant. It actually is just a line item in the state budget that funds local housing authorities. And then, you know, if anyone has questions about these grant programs, we can talk about it later. Suffice to say, those are the statutorily defined penalties. So, in addition to the requirements that are in that statute, the law also gives the housing regulator, which I've got to update this actually. Breaking news: DHCD is not a thing anymore. It's actually the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. It's now a cabinet level secretariat, just like the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Health and Human Services. So we'll have to fix that. I apologize for that. But the law gives the housing regulator the ability to set guidelines for compliance, because, you know, when I tell you that the text of the act is not much more than what's on this slide, believe me, it's not much more than what's on this slide. And so the acknowledgement there was that towns would need guidance for how to comply with these requirements. So the statute is like this, and the guidelines are like this. The owl can't see me because it's got the slides on, but believe me when I tell you, I'm making a big motion with my hands. So I recommend reading the final guidelines. It's a big-ish document, but it's worth sort of going through all the sort of arcane details, but I'll try to simplify it for folks. The statute says that the location of the district has to be within a half a mile of a transit station. So in Milton's case, we've got 4 Mattapan trolley stations, plus Mattapan station's half-mile radius captures a significant portion of Milton. There's an acknowledgement on the part of the state that, especially in situations like Milton's, where you've got transit that half-mile radius is not actually capturing all of town, it's actually capturing the river, it's capturing city of Boston. We actually don't have to have all of our districts within a half a mile of the transit area, because the amount of developable area in the transit area is less than if you were, say, City of Newton, which has a D line that goes right through the middle of the city. All of their half-mile radii are sort of all in Newton. You know, they have to do more than 90% of their district has to be in the transit area. The guidelines say that we can do as much as 50% of our zoning district anywhere else in town. We can also create sub-districts. It doesn't have to be one uniform district, contiguous all the way throughout with the same set of requirements. We can do multiple sub-districts with different dimensional requirements, different shapes, different locations. The only requirements there in the guidelines are at least half of our district, and I'm going to be talking about our district. What I'm really talking about is the sum of all of the different sub-districts that we're talking about. So when I say district, I mean everything. But what actually we're going to be doing is creating a series of smaller sub-districts. Some of them are contiguous, some of them are not. At least half of the district has to be contiguous. So if you've got to do 50 acres, 25 of those acres have to be all together, and then the rest can be out wherever. If you do sub-districts, however, the sub-districts have to be a minimum of 5 acres. So when I say the rest can be out there wherever, it's not quite out there wherever. It's got to be a minimum of 5 districts. So you couldn't do, if we were going to do 50 acres, 25 of them are contiguous. You can't do 25 1-acre sub-districts. You've got to do at least 5 5-acre sub-districts to keep the math nice and simple. The math gets very not simple after that. The dimensional requirements and zoning is effectively dimensional requirements on buildings. How tall can the building be? How much of the lot can it cover? How far does it have to be from the property line? These are all bread and butter dimensional restrictions. They don't have to be uniform across sub-districts. We can do whatever, I'm going to say whatever, but let's be reasonable. But, you know, setbacks, heights, individual density in these individual sub-districts are all up for grabs. The only requirement there, again, is, and this is laid out in statute, that the overall density of the entire zoning district, so the sum of all of your sub-districts, has to come out to 15 units per acre. And so the example that I use here is, you know, one sub-district comprising half the total district can have a density of 5 units per acre, which is less than the 15 per acre that's defined by statute, as long as the other half of the district is at a density of 25 units per acre. So that adds up to 15 units per acre. I keep on saying how bad I am at math, but then I don't go and make sure that this math is correct. You know what I mean. It could be, you know, one sub-district can have a low density as long as it's offset by high density in another district, and it all adds up to 15 units per acre. So there is flexibility there that's going to help us craft sub-districts that really meet what I think the needs of the town are. The guidelines and the way that the state is testing and confirming the guidelines also put constraints on us. And I don't want to go too far into it in this meeting. What I would recommend is we want to know a little bit more about the constraints on that we have in terms of dimensional requirements and density and location of these districts. I gave what I think is a pretty in-depth explanation at our last public forum, the recording of which is on the website. If you have questions, happy to go deeper into it, but I want to make sure we get through all the material tonight. So again, there's going to be a Q&A later. If you have basic questions, intermediate questions, in-depth complicated questions about these requirements, please do not hesitate to ask us. But I'm going to ask Josh to come up and talk a little bit about the survey results.
Thanks, Tim. So as Tim mentioned at the start of the meeting, we've been running this public survey since February of 2023. That's when we started doing a lot of this public engagement in earnest. We updated it after our last public forum in May. We tried to get out the word as much as possible. We posted it at all of the trolley stops in Milton, at businesses in Central Square and in Milton Village, Kelly Field, as well as announcing it at public meetings where we were talking about MBTA communities. And if any of you are on the email list, over and over again, over email, on our social media, it's always linked to on our MBTA communities page. We translated it into Spanish, French, and simplified Chinese, based off of some of the demographic data we have and the languages spoken in Milton. I've had to update this number continually throughout the week, and today even, we've received 161 responses. And the number keeps growing. Please, if you haven't pulled it out, there's a QR code on those laminated sheets, and it's on the website. I've tried to make it as accessible as possible. One of the key questions that we asked is what precinct folks were from. We found that to be a way a lot of Miltonians sort of identify themselves in their neighborhood. Precincts 2 and 3 are really well represented in our survey results, which we're grateful for because those largely comprise that transit area. Mm-hmm. What we found in these questions has been some really helpful feedback. One of the initial sort of concerns we had was which minimum of the law we would seek to use as our baseline, whether 50 acres as the minimum area would be what we seek to work towards and have that be high density but relatively small, or if we want to use the density of 15 units per acre as our aim to have a larger district. What we found in the respondents is that a plurality preferred a larger, lower density district. But as you can see in the grading, there were a lot of additional thoughts, context, nuance in those responses that we were really grateful to receive. You know, those others weren't just, we don't want it anywhere, we put it in Boston. It was a lot of really thoughtful responses, and I'm really grateful for the thought and time and attention people put into those questions. A lot of that has resulted in us crafting test compliance districts that have variable densities, higher density where we know we have existing higher density units. Tim talked about those in the main meeting if you want to look at exactly where we were talking about. We also asked for where in town outside of the transit area, because we can have 50% outside of that area. Respondents thought would be most appropriate for a district that complies with this law. As you can see in that word cloud, things that came up a lot among respondents were Granite Avenue, particularly the American Legion Hall and the State DPW yard. That was previously highlighted in our housing production plan and is something we've run the compliance modeling tool on, as well as expanded it since our last meeting to include the portions at the commercial building at 2 Granite Avenue, the other side of the interchange. Blue Hill Avenue and Blue Hills Parkway was also mentioned by a lot of residents, which is why we started testing a sub-district just off of Blue Hills Avenue on Curtis, where Woody House is. That parcel, again, you can see in the main meeting presentation. Randolph Avenue, another, you can see the pattern. It's these major thoroughfares and arteries. Also highlighted and also tested by us and our technical assistance providers. So we're trying to be as responsive as possible to the places where you all believe we can try and make this work. East Milton, center of the work cloud, the most popular response by far. We are years into a long mixed use zoning sort of process. We did a long visioning program a while ago and are stepping into a discrete mixed use overlay zoning conversation and technical assistance program to get mixed use zoning in East Milton. So we did test it previously. We since removed it as a potential district because we're undergoing this additional separate zoning exercise there, but we will see a lot of really interesting and exciting zoning conversations in East Milton. I hope you can also be part of that conversation. In May, we asked some additional questions, particularly around the services and benefits that people wanted to see or were concerned about. As Tim, spoiled before, affordable housing was the #1 concern by residents. We asked you all to rank those 6 choices as benefits that we typically see. Affordable housing and commercial space were those 2 top choices. We can allow for 10% affordable housing as part of this district. And as Tim has talked about previously, this zoning will create an opportunity to have more affordability in our housing, if not necessarily deep restricted affordable housing in a way that those units, which you can find the flyers on at the front desk there at 34 Fairbanks Street are. We also saw schools as far and away the #1 concern of a service that would be overburdened. We know that is always a concern, is an existing present day concern, and really want to make sure that that is highlighted. Tim will talk about some responses to that and some data we have regarding school impacts that we've seen in other multi-family zoning efforts. There were additional questions. I can talk about those in the Q&A if you'd like, but those were some of the key takeaways. We'll continue to update that survey. The QR code is on the front desk and as I've said, many other places.
Thank you, Josh. Just a quick update on the technical assistance that we have. And just to sort of, I'll use this as an opportunity to talk in just a tiny bit more detail about kind of what this technical assistance is necessary for. In order to basically gauge compliance for 175 different zoning codes that the state is going to be seeing in the next 2 years, the state developed what's called a compliance model. And what this is a software tool that kind of inside of it contains all of the different requirements of the guidelines and of the law. And what they ask towns to do is sort of provide the inputs, and the inputs being the location of your districts, and it's a sort of a global information system based tool where if you've ever used the GIS on the town website, you can sort of capture all of these parcels in your zoning district. You put them into the model, and the model says, okay, now we know the size and shape and character of all of these parcels in your district. And then you input your dimensional restriction. So in this district, we're going to do minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet, 3 units per lot, 10-foot setbacks, 25-foot height, whatever your restrictions are, you plug those into the model. And the model spits out the outputs that are kind of necessary to sort of judge compliance with the law. Minimum density of your whole district, it's got to be 15 units per acre. The size of your district has to be at least 50 acres. The other sort of requirement that's been put in via the guidelines is what's called a unit capacity of your zoning district. And what the state is basically saying there is you've got to create a zoning district that it has the potential for X number of units to be built. And that is a factor of your level of service at the MBTA, whether it's rapid transit, commuter rail, or if you're adjacent to one of those types of service. And it's also a function of your size via the number of year-round housing units you have. So the way that the state figures it is rapid transit communities, which are the inner core communities, your Cambridges, your Somervilles, your Quincy's, your Newtons, your Brooklines, that all have MBTA rapid transit service. They have the highest requirement. So 25% of your existing year-round housing stock is your unit capacity. So you've got to create a zoning district that potentially could create, 9,611 times 0.25. Our number is 2461. That's our unit capacity. And so that's the sort of the final metric that this compliance model tests. It says, based on the size of the district, based on the parcels that are in the district that you inputted, based on the dimensional requirements that you put in, do you meet all of these things? Overall density, size, and unit capacity. And so we do have the in-house capability to do this stuff. Josh is very smart. We have a GIS specialist, but we also have all sorts of state resources to hook us up with consultants that have much more facility with these tools. And so we've been working with a firm named UTIL, very prominent planning and urban design firm in the region, and also the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is our regional planners. And we've been sort of feeding them scenarios based on discussion with the planning board, based on our own knowledge and experience, kind of what we feel is sort of the universe of possibilities in town, based on some of the survey data that Josh had kind of walked through, and basically started to test some potential districts. If you go back and watch the recording from the main meeting, technical assistance providers test, and this is our first bullet here. Our first run through this compliance model, we tested the transit area as a whole, everything within a half a mile of transit. Plus we tested the 2 Granite Ave parcels at the Legion Hall and the DPW yard. We also tested East Milton. The second round of tests includes locations on Randolph Ave, locations on Blue Hill Ave and Brush Hill Road, additional locations on Granite Ave, and some finer grained sub-districts within the transit area, effectively trying to test additional density on the already sort of large multifamily or sort of non-residential parcels in the transit area. So we've got planners at MAPC that are working on that. Our goal there is to, and I tried to explain this in hopefully pretty great detail at the last meeting, is we're trying to give the town a set of options for compliance that basically say, okay, if you do these things, you're going to get a compliant district. And from there, start to have the conversation of, okay, we think this works. We don't think this works. This district is too big. This district could be bigger. This district is too dense. Let's crank up the density in this district. We're not there yet because we haven't run enough tests to know that we actually meet any of the compliance requirements, in totality. And so that's where we're trying to get. And then you create the big thing, and then you sort of whittle it down to something that works. Because I think my instinct, and I think the instinct of most folks that we've talked to has been, we're interested in complying, but we're not interested in doing a ton more than we have to do. Because this is the biggest zoning effort that the town has gone through since 1938. And so we want to make sure we're hitting those targets as close as we can. Another thing that UTIL, which is our other technical assistance partner, is working on is refining the geography of the transit area. And what we found based on that first test, and we talked through this at the last meeting, was if you zone the entire transit area for what we believe is an appropriate density, and is actually sort of the smallest possible density that you can have, at sort of 3 or 4 units per lot, you don't hit your numbers. The overall density of the district, as we modeled it the first time, comes out to something like 8.8 units per acre. And so the constraint on density is, if you've got a 5,000 square foot lot, which a lot of the lots on Elliott Street, Capon Street, Valley Road, those side streets are undersized lots. You really can't fit many more than 3 units, and 3 units is a stretch in a lot of cases. So cranking up the density on each individual lot is not really an option that's realistic and feasible. So what UTIL is trying to do is look at the existing parcelization that we have. So we've got small parcels on Elliott Street, we've got big parcels on Adams Street. Can we refine the borders of the zoning district to get maximum credit for density without having so much land that it's dragging down our figures. And this is all starting to get a little arcane without visuals, but I'll give you one example. If we have an acre on Adam Street and we say, in the Adam Street subdistrict, the restrictions that we put in, we said 10,000 square foot minimum lot size. You can put 4 units on a 10,000 square foot lot. The way that the state's model operates is it doesn't assume that your acre parcel is going to have 4 10,000 square foot parcels beside of it. It's just saying, here's a parcel, it meets the minimum lot size, we're giving you credit for 4 units. In reality, if that parcel was zoned, you would get 16 units on it. You get 4 on 4 subdivided parcels. That may be what would happen in real life, but we're not dealing with real life yet. We're dealing with the computer program that the state has given us. And so what UTIL is doing is trying to identify parcels like that, where you are not getting maximum credit for what would happen in real life. Because the way that they calculate the gross density, the overall density of the district, is they basically say total number of units that are potentially possible under the zoning divided by the total area of the district. And so if I'm only getting 4 units on an entire acre, which is 43,560 square feet, that's not a good bang for your buck when it comes to creating zoning. And so they're trying to further refine the transit area and find essentially chunks of the transit area that we're just not going to zone because it's going to drag down our numbers too much. And so they're going to be providing advice about that. That's always been something that I think we're after in terms of from a sort of a fairness perspective. And this is something that we've heard in comments at the planning board and public meetings, through our survey, through emails that we've gotten, is that, we want to take advantage of the flexibility of half of the district in the transit area, half of the district elsewhere. And where we stand right now, a significant portion of the district is actually in the transit area right now. And so we're trying to figure out ways to kind of right size that district. And then finally, UTIL is also working on visualizations of what build out would look like under the parameters that we're plugging into these models. That work is in a little bit of a holding pattern because we haven't yet settled on here's what the dimensional restrictions are going to be in this given district. But once we do have that kind of settled, they're going to create, 3D diagrams that show, okay, in this build out scenario, if half of the street gets built out in X number of years, here's what it'll look like under the parameters that you have. Because, zoning, some of us have a sort of beautiful mind type thing where we can sort of see, I'm not saying I do, other people do. You can sort of see what happens when you look at the words on the page, but most regular folks don't have that. And it really is handy to sort of see this stuff in a 3D sort of visual form. So we want to provide that to folks so that they have a good chance to kind of get an idea of what the physical impacts of these changes will be. So I wanted to talk about 2 specific subjects that have been sort of coming up in our public meeting conversations and in our survey. This is a conversation we've been having at the planning board, and we had a little bit of it at our last public meeting. And that's sort of the Mattapan line is the transit that the town has. And the MBTA considers the Mattapan line to be rapid transit. Rapid transit is red line, green line, blue line, orange line, silver line. And that is how the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, formerly DHCD, sort of started to categorize communities. You've got rapid transit communities, which have the best service, the most frequent service, the most sort of reliable service. You've got commuter rail communities. Commuter rail runs less frequently, less days. And then you've got adjacent communities that actually don't have transit, but are close enough to transit that they're considered to be part of the MBTA communities. And it sort of raises the question of, what is the nature of the Mattapan line? Hopefully folks in the room have been on a Mattapan train in the past. You obviously know that it's not a red line train, it's not a green line train. It's its own thing. And the sort of the questions that have been raised is, it's not the same type of service. Okay? If you were to get on a D line train at Riverside in noon, and you're fortunate enough to get a seat, you are in that seat from Riverside to Park Street downtown, and then you get out and you go to your office job at whatever. It's funny, no one's working downtown anymore, so I don't know what we're talking about. People are working downtown. You don't get that with the Mattapan. You get on the train at Mattapan, or you get on the train at Capon Street or Valley Road or Milton. You get off the Mattapan trolley and then you go wait on the platform at Ashland. And sometimes you're lucky and the train is right there. Sometimes you're not lucky and you waited 5 minutes at Central Ave, and then you're waiting another 15 minutes at Ashmont, and you eventually get downtown. But it's not sort of that seamless ride. And so that's something that is a real distinction between rapid transit lines. That being said, there's other things that speak for the Mattapan line in terms of its status as rapid transit. The frequency is in line with the Green Line. It's better than the Red Line. It runs on weekends, which you can't say for many commuter rail lines. And it's got its own dedicated right-of-way by virtue of being on train tracks, which you can't say for the 240 bus, for instance, which gets stuck in traffic all the time if you've taken the 240 bus. And so there is this sort of intermediate state that the Mattapan line is in. This is important because the requirements that are put on cities and towns are tied directly to the level of MBTA service that they get. And so if there are questions about the status, quality, frequency, et cetera, of Mattapan line service, it raises questions about the requirements that are being placed on the town of Milton. And so this is an issue that's come up in our meetings. The planning board is currently coordinating with the select board on sort of a strategy for how to broach this issue with the state. I think we want to have that conversation with them in terms of, is there a potential for relief from some of these requirements in the guidelines? Is there relief in terms of the timeline for actually producing these districts? Is there an opportunity to really, turn the screws on the MBTA, which, as everyone knows, has not treated the Mattapan line as equitably as it's maybe has treated other lines. Although there are a lot of lines on the T that maybe have not been treated as equitably as anyone wants. So I think this is sort of the beginning of a conversation that's happening at sort of the elected leadership level. And really there are, questions about, what exactly do we want and kind of what are we after here? I did want to just present some data about the Mattapan line, because I think, if you don't ride it as much as, if you're not commuting downtown, if you're working from home, if you're driving downtown, you may not have as much experience. Although again, I'm sure, everyone has ridden the Mattapan trolley at some point. So it does run more frequently than a lot of other lines. You can just see, this is straight from the MBTA website. The heavy rail Red Line runs every 7 to 8 minutes, 13 to 15 minutes. On off peak. The Mattapan line, peak hour every 6 minutes, off peak every 12 minutes. That's pretty good. It's comparable to the Green Line. And again, it runs more frequently than the Red Line. That being said, the other issue with the Mattapan line is when you get on at Ashmont, there are 7 long, 7, 5, I don't know how many, but you know what a subway train looks like. And it doesn't look like a PCC car that runs on the Mattapan trolley. So the capacity of these other lines is greater. And that's a question that we've actually put to the T. We're going to go to a slide here where we actually got boarding data, fresh spring 2023 boarding data from the T about, when are folks getting on the Mattapan trolley. We followed up with them, to talk about capacity. The numbers that you see on this slide right here are, we don't do work on cocktail napkins in town hall, but effectively that's what this is. If you assume that one of these PCC cars on the Mattapan line holds 50 people, and that's comparable to other PCC cars that have historically run, and you run 6-minute headways, that's 10 cars an hour, 60 minutes an hour divided by 6. You can run 500 riders on the Mattapan line in an hour. And you can sort of see from that chart, you're getting up to, 279 in one direction at 4 p.m. At sort of, your high point of ridership. So my kind of very, very rough kind of calculation here says that there is capacity on the Mattapan trolley, but, the caveat being, these are numbers that aren't quite out of thin air, but they're not official numbers. And the other question being, it all depends on the T running service as it hopes to run. And everyone hopes that we run 6-minute headways, at peak commuting times, but we all know that sometimes a tree falls on the tracks or one of the 120-year-old PCC cars, blows a gasket and has to be taken out of commission. And so, we followed up with the T about, what is the real capacity of this line? What is the capacity of the line as it's currently configured today to absorb new riders? Because we think this is important information. When we talk about approaching the state with, our kind of concerns about, this is a sort of intermediary state between commuter rail, bus, and rapid transit. The important thing to consider is what the state's response is going to be. And they very deliberately tied their requirements to the level of service that the MBTA offers. And there is a precipitous drop off once you get outside of the subway, in terms of frequency, in terms of, I'll use the term reliability, but what I really mean is, when are these trains running? What days are they running? Just to give just an example of these schedules, and this is today's schedule starting, 5:30 a.m. The Kingston line, which runs through Quincy, if you wanted to pick it up, you could go to Quincy Center or Quincy Adams. It's in Quincy. Goes all the way down to Kings and Plymouth, and then you will obviously go to South Station if that's where you wanted to go. 5:30, 6:30, 7:25, 8:30. This is running every hour effectively. So if that's how you wanted to get downtown, if you didn't make it for 5:30, you're kind of out of luck until 6:30. The Franklin line, which goes from Foxborough through Dedham and Hyde Park into South Station, a little bit better. You can see, that Windsor Gardens train, the 495 train will run every hour. But then you've got an opportunity, 5:34, 5:57, 6:34, again, approximately every half hour, on a flag train on the Foxborough line. So if you wanted to get into Dedham or Hyde Park and pick that up, again, a little bit better, but again, if you miss that 5:57 train, you're out of luck for at least a half an hour. The Fairmount line, closest Fairmount line trains are at Fairmount Station. Technically, there's a little skosh of the half-mile radius of Fairmount that catches some houses on Beacon Street. We're not considered a commuter rail community as a result of that because we have the Mattapan line. You can pick that up at Reedville, you can pick it up at Fairmount, you can pick it up at Blue Hill Ave. Maybe one of these days they'll build a River Street station. But again, in the morning, starting at 4:45, 4:45, an hour later, 45 minutes later, 45 minutes later. So, and this doesn't take into account, weekend service, which is either spotty or non-existent on a lot of these lines. And so the requirements that the state has put on these communities that have these levels of service is really kind of predicated on, can you build your life around, to what extent can you build your life around transit, right? And if you live, in Coolidge Corner in Brookline, and you've got the C line and the B line is a couple blocks that way, the D line's a couple blocks that way, and you're in this amenity-rich neighborhood with grocery stores and doctor's offices and all that stuff. You could have a sort of a transit-oriented life. You may not even own a car. If you live in Kingston, you might take the train to work, but you're probably not taking the train to the grocery store or the dentist or whatever. You're doing your sort of local daily life stuff. However it is you do it, it's probably in a car. And so the acknowledgement on the part of the state is in the places where the transit service is the richest and the most robust, we want to have the most amount of housing. And that's why we're asking Newton, Cambridge, Somerville, and Milton to build them or zone for, I should say, the most amount of housing, as opposed to these other communities which have T service, but probably not as robust as in the inner core. And so that becomes a really important nuance in the conversation of, you know, yes, the Mattapan line is not as, it's different from the Green Line, but it's also different from the commuter rail. And so sort of situating that service in the continuum of service and kind of, you know, modulating your ask, for lack of a better term, becomes really important. So that's an ongoing conversation. You know, we are in pretty frequent contact with the T on a sort of low-level staff level for data purposes. At a higher level on the Mattapan transformation project, which is another thing to sort of keep in mind, because we're talking today about developing zoning and we're in a certain condition. You know, we've got 2 refurbished Mattapan line cars, and we don't have stairs at our train station. The goal and the plan, and as a planner, I'm legally obligated to put my faith in plans. We are engaged in this Mattapan line transformation project, which is a sort of multiple phase project to, 1, refurbish the existing PCC cars, take out all of the old components, the asbestos and lead paint that is probably in there, air conditioning, improve, you know, the actual, you know, physical rolling stock to improve the reliability of these cars so that there's fewer breakdowns, there's more comfortable, reliable service. Phase 2 is actually fixing the stations, raising the levels of the platforms for accessibility purposes, adding all of the sort of, you know, modern station amenities that make it a place where, you know, you would actually wait for a train as opposed to not even bothering because there's no shelter and you can't actually get on the train. So there's a number of improvements that are in sort of the capital planning phase right now. And then the final phase of this project is actually to replace those PCC cars. PCC stands for President's Conference Committee. This was way back in the day. The presidents of all the major transit lines came together and like designed the Mattapan trolley. They used it in Toronto. They used it in all sorts of other things. So when you hear me say PCC, that's what I'm talking about. It has nothing to do with like the president of the United States, which I thought it might have. You know, like Herbert Hoover kind of rolling up his sleeves and designing a train. This thing on. So there's another type of train called a Type 9 train, not dissimilar from some of the newer Green Line trains. These are modern, they're larger. We actually have the parts to fix them. One of the sort of the famous, you know, things about the T is they still have a blacksmith on staff to actually fabricate some of these parts that have long since been, you know, built by defunct rail operators. And so that's the longer term plan, is to replace the PCC cars with a more consistent type of rolling stock. Maintenance facility near Mattapan Station to again help them repair cars when you know, when they do kind of break down, and then parking and drop off improvements. So the plan is a good one, and if and when it gets implemented, it'll represent real serious improvements to the Mattapan line. You know, all of this is caveated by the fact that there are a lot of needs on the T. And, you know, the Mattapan line has its troubles, but it's been a while since cars caught fire, which is more than we can say for the Orange Line first. And so, you know, all of this is kind of situated in a world where there are competing needs for capital improvements all over the system, and kind of, you know, where do we fit in terms of those improvements. The T is actually holding a meeting on this project on Tuesday, the 20th at 6:30 p.m. I don't know what's on the agenda for that. The T and the state generally are pretty cagey about what they plan to talk about in these meetings ahead of time. I'm hoping there's good news, you know, about the progress of the project. This is the link. If you don't want to transcribe that right now, we will be sending this out to our email list. And again, this presentation will be posted tomorrow. You can get that link, and that'll be a remote meeting. I think it is a remote meeting, right? Yes. Yeah. So you can participate from the comfort of home. And, whatever comes out of that, we will incorporate it into an update to the planning board and to the public at our next forum. So the other thing, and you saw this from our survey results earlier, in terms of what people are concerned about when we talk about, multifamily zoning, which the town has never done by right multifamily zoning. And just, I might not have mentioned earlier, by right is an important component of this legislation because it means in town of Milton, if you have a 7,500 square foot lot in a C zone and you want to build a house, you can walk into the building department, and if your plan meets the setbacks and the height requirements, you get a building permit for your house and you're off to the races. Other types of building, multifamily, commercial, other sort of non-compliant building is subject to what we call discretionary processes, special permits from the planning board, board of appeals, variances from zoning from the board of appeals. And we call them discretionary processes because there is no discretion in a building permit. It's very black and white. You either meet the requirements or you don't. If you meet the requirements, you get your permit. If you don't, you don't. With the discretionary special permit project, your elected leaders or appointed leaders in the case of the board of appeals have parameters by which to judge these applications, but they have more discretion to either level conditions or to reject applications. It's a way of exerting control over development, which the town has done, since zoning was initiated in 1922. The state feels that the by right process offers predictability, certainty, and will enable more housing to be built because the length of the process is shorter, the requirements are clearer, and there's no one that, if you meet the requirements, no one can step in and say, no, you can't build this thing. So when you have a by right zoning scheme, you have a lot of control at the beginning when you write the zoning because you get to put whatever you want into the zoning. And then it's like, I've got a 4-year-old at home, one of these days he's going to have to go out into the world. And one of these days we're going to have to put our zoning out to the world and people are going to avail themselves of it. And then you lose that control. And so it underscores the importance of getting it right, but it also underscores the potential for, actually getting things built because if the zoning works, people are going to use it. And hopefully it reflects, your values and your planning principles. All of this is to say there's a little bit of a side quest on by right zoning, but when you have by right zoning, you don't really know in any given year, how many units are we going to get? Is someone going to try to build a big multifamily building here, or is that not going to happen for another few years? And so having a better idea of what is reasonable to expect in terms of build out under this zoning is something that we're very interested in. Planning board especially is very interested. We've heard it in public meetings as well. So we're using some state resources to engage with RKG associates to conduct what's called a fiscal impact analysis of the new zoning. And what that basically means is, and RKG is a very reputable firm. They do this throughout the Commonwealth, throughout the country. They take the sort of parameters that are given to them. And usually it's about a large development project. They worked on a project that I actually worked on when I was in the city of Boston at L Street Station, the old Edison plant in South Boston. And they basically did the same fiscal impact analysis. They said there's going to be, 500 units, there's going to be a couple 100,000 square feet of commercial. Here's how many new firefighters are going to have to be. Here's the impact on police. Here's the impact on your infrastructure. Here's the impact on your school. We anticipate this many new school children. This is the impact on your tax revenue. This is how much tax revenue you're going to get from all of this. They know how to model out these things based on data, based on interviews with town officials, based on all of the sort of information we have at town hall about our staffing levels and our budgets and things like that. So I literally just got a revised contract back from them. I'm going to put it on the town administrator's desk in the morning. And we're going to be off to the races with RKG to do this fiscal impact analysis, modeling the impacts on school enrollment, on town services, and on tax revenue, among other things. These impacts become important because the more you build, the more cars there are on the road, the more people are falling 911, the more people are turning on their faucets, So managing this and understanding what these impacts are becomes very important. So, we put this in our survey, what are the impacts of new development that you're most concerned about? And you saw that schools were the number one. I was at town meeting, same as everyone else. I know that, the school enrollment issue is among the hottest. It's just blazing hot. I'm glad that I'm only on the outskirts of that because it's a tough conversation. And we all understand that. So we want to know if we enable a certain amount of building and a certain type of building to happen, how many kids are we going to get? And so it's an important question. RKG is going to help us with it. We have some amount of data already to kind of give us a general idea of what the impacts of multifamily housing on households with school-aged children are. A couple things that I think are really important to kind of start off with at the outset is that Section 3A of 48, the MBTA Communities Law, is very specific when it says that you have to zone for housing that's suitable for families with children. You can't have age restrictions. Putting age restrictions on your zoning is a very it's a common way to sort of get multifamily housing built and avoiding those school-age children impacts, because if you're in an over 55 or over 65 or other type of development, the odds of you having school-age children is very low. The state and there's a need for that type of housing everywhere, including in the town of Milton. If you read our housing production plan, you understand the need for senior housing. What 3A basically says is that you can't require in your zoning senior housing. You can allow it. So if you were to zone for 100 units on a parcel, a senior housing developer could come in and say, we want to build age restricted housing on this, and you can do that. It's just that your zoning can't say you have to do age restricted housing. That's really all it is. And the way that they have interpreted, and this is the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, the way that they've interpreted suitable for families with children is very simply, you can't say you can only build one bedroom apartment. So that's all it is. You can't put a bedroom requirement. So if someone wants to build apartments with 4 bedrooms, you've got to let them do that. What you're going to see later on is that probably won't happen. So we've done an analysis of regional data from the US Census and some local data on multifamily housing that exists in town of Milton today to just sort of set the table for expectations around multifamily housing and school enrollment. The last thing that I'll say is the federal fair housing law kind of prevents you from making permitting decisions that discriminate on the basis of family status. So you can't create zoning that says no kids, right? You just can't do it. But it's an issue, right? So I'm not going to skirt around the fact that, if you put 1,000 new school kids in the town of Milton, where would they go to school? I mean, that's an issue that's important. I think what we're trying to say is that we're probably not going to get 1,000 new school kids. And so this is based on the 2021 American Housing Survey of the Boston Metropolitan Statistical Area, which is basically, it's a census geography that stretches from southern New Hampshire down to the South Coast. That's considered to be the Boston region for the census. And every few years they do the American Housing Survey, which goes out to folks and kind of asks them, what kind of house do you live in? How many units? Got all sorts of really great information, but got really good detailed household level data on who's living in these homes, what type of homes are they. So this is the region. We're part of this region. This is data for the whole region. So we're talking about on the order of tens of thousands of housing units and millions of people. Less than a third of all housing units that are occupied. And occupied is important here. So we're not counting vacant units. We're not counting second vacation homes. This is homes that people live in year round. It's sort of the metric that we're dealing with. 72% of all occupied housing units do not have kid in them, which is, it seems like there's more kids, but there's not. So of that 28% of occupied housing units that have school-aged children, more than half, so 6 + 2 is 8, is 10, 27. So 19% out of 27% is children living in single family homes, right? So that's your blue there. So this is where most kids are living. They're living in single family houses. We're going to dig a little bit more into that in some of these other slides. So twice as many households with children live in single family homes than in multi-unit buildings. And multi-unit buildings for these purposes is a 2-family house or greater. So it doesn't exactly match up to the state's definition of multifamily, which is 3 units or more, but it almost does. And so of all of the, so we're talking about now the totality of households with children. 35 plus 38 is 73%, right? Live in single family houses, and then the remainder live in multifamily houses. Now, if you do the math like I did this afternoon, that comes out to 107%. There is some margin of error kind of overlap. There's also not on this chart is manufactured housing. So these are like mobile homes, which can be considered single family, can be considered multifamily. So what I'm asking you to do is pay less attention to the numbers and more just the ratios of these bars. You know, there are many more children that are living in single family housing than in multifamily housing. So why is this, right? And you can kind of back into this just based on what the state's requirements have been regarding, you know, the way we interpret family-friendly housing is not a restriction on bedrooms. The more bedrooms you have, the more kids you have. You know, there are exceptions to every rule. I have 1 kid and I live in a 4-bedroom condo. I just moved out of it because it's too big. And then, you know, obviously you've got, you know, 1 and 2 bedrooms that have, you know, multiple children. But the rule of thumb is that, you know, if you're young folks starting out, you're in a studio or a 1. If you've got a larger family with multiple children, you're looking for multiple bedrooms. And so bedroom count is one of the leading factors in determining whether a family, you know, lives in a given housing unit. And so you look at the single family homes in the Boston metropolitan area, 80% of them, and again, this doesn't quite add up to 100%. You know, again, there's some margin of error overlap and there's some sort of manufactured home overlap, but the vast majority of single family houses in the region have 3 bedrooms or more. And that's family housing. Almost exactly inverse for multi-unit buildings. So in the metropolitan area, you know, almost 3/4 of the housing in multi-unit buildings has 2 bedrooms or fewer. So 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom, studio. So this has an effect on who's living in these buildings and what types of families are living in them, and kind of what sort of impacts those populations are having on local schools. So this chart, and for whatever reason, it came in black and white. It's different colors every time I pasted these. But so this is now this is looking only at the multi-unit buildings in the region, and it kind of classifies them by size. So 2 to 4 units, 5 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 49, and then your big buildings, 50 or more units. The bedroom count in these is there's no type of multifamily housing that has more than 50% of it has more than 2 bedrooms, right? This is what this chart is saying, is that the larger your building gets, and there's some kind of modulation there, the more likely it is to have these smaller units. This is a function of all sorts of things in the real estate market. It's a function of all sorts of things in land costs, material costs, the physical kind of, you know, how do you're not going to have, unless you're, you know, 1 Dalton Street, you know, in Back Bay, you're probably not going to have huge multi-bedroom condo units in giant towers. You're going to have an apartment building with 1s and 2s and a handful of 3 bedrooms, you know, if necessary. So all of this goes to say that the law prevents us from regulating bedroom count, but the market takes care of that, right? One kind of way that this bears out is if you look at the 40B applications that the town has seen, and the state requires for 40B multifamily housing that a certain percentage, it might be 20%, there's a certain percentage of 40B units that have to be 3 bedrooms or more. State makes you do it because the state, when you're building multifamily, when you're building affordable housing, they want to give families an opportunity to live in affordable housing. So they compel developers to do this. And in every case, of every 40B that's been proposed in the town of Milton, there's been 7 of them in recent years, every developer has included the minimum state requirement for family-sized units. Once they pass the threshold of units that they're required to build, 3 bedrooms or more, they're immediately going to 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms. It's where the market is. It's where people who want to live in multifamily housing want to live. They don't want to live in these multiple bedroom units. There is a need and a demand for the smaller units. So that's the region, right? And this is the census, and it takes into account City of Boston and Quincy and Cambridge, and it takes into account all of the little tiny towns that we don't remember the names of. So some of those towns are like Milton, some of them are not. We do have some Milton specific data, okay? And so these are all of, excluding Winter Valley, Fuller Village, and Unquity House, and the public housing operated by the Milton Housing Authority. This is the multi-unit housing in the town of Milton. 175 Milton Street, the former borough estate, 333 Brush Hill Road, the condos over there off of Smith Road, 36 Central, we're familiar with. 36 Elliott Street is the Milton Hill House, 50 Elliott is the new Milton Hill House, 88 Wharf Street, the Quissit Brook development, which is a attached cluster development, which is effectively townhouses, and then Woodmere, which is our most recent complete multi-unit project. Those are townhouses, so two houses in a building. I didn't include Walcott Woods, just it's not done, so the data is not really there. So 252 units of multi-unit housing in the town of Milton today. That's not age restricted. You look at the ratio there of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, and it kind of starts to bear out. You've got 159 plus 62, 1 and 2s, and then the remainder is 3 plus. So that tendency of multi-unit housing to want to be smaller in terms of bedroom size bears out in town of Milton. And then, this is data from Milton Public Schools. How many kids do we have in each of these addresses? So 252 multi-unit housing units, 27 kids. Okay. There are buildings that don't have any kids. Some of them have a handful, some of them have more. You start to see 333 Brush Hill Road is an interesting development. It's got some townhouses, some sort of standalone houses. But that's of our most recent school year. So all of this housing, by the way, built via special permit or site plan approval / variance from the Board of Appeals. Compare this to our most recently completed subdivision projects, which Jill Kathleen Lane is a standard subdivision, went to the planning board for subdivision, but it created zoning compliant subdivision lots. Woodlot Drive is obviously the town farm property. That was a special permit project, but again, look and feel of a traditional single family subdivision. 31 units in both of those projects. All of them are 3 or more bedrooms. So each one of those houses has 3 or more bedrooms. 22 Milton Public School students coming out of the 31 units in those 2 subdivisions. So this is what our zoning is encouraging people to do. And I want to, before I get off this slide, I want to make sure that I'm being really, really, really clear about something. It's our job to educate our kids, right? And so I'm not advocating for one type of housing versus another type of housing because one is going to have more kids and the other is not going to have more kids. I think whatever kids are living in the town of Milton, we've got to figure out a way to get them into school and to give them the best education that's possible. I think that the thing that people are concerned about is that costs money. And how do we, balance our planning goals? How do we balance our state mandates, via not just MBTA communities, but state mandates on education? How do we figure out a way to balance all of these things in a way that kind of reflects our values? And so this becomes really important to understand the stuff that you're already building is having a certain impact, And the stuff that you're not building will have a different impact. And the stuff that you're being asked to build is going to have a third impact. And so that's why we've done this analysis. That's why we are hiring a consultant who is professionally, this is what they do every day is figure this stuff out. And it really becomes important information for kind of how we shape this zoning and quite frankly, how we shape, the rest of our zoning. I think it'll be a really interesting exercise, not just for this, this zoning mandate, but for how we approach land use regulation generally. What exactly, are the impacts of these types of developments? It's part of, a general kind of economic development and planning strategy that the town engages in. So what's next? This is the same slide as we did the last time. I'll show this slide as many times as we have these meetings. We're going to be doing monthly public forums until town meeting or whenever this process ends. Our next one is on July 17th. That'll be remote via Zoom. We don't have the Zoom link up yet, but we will have it in advance of that meeting. That's going to go out to our email list. I encourage you to go to the planning and community development page on townofmilton.org. Sign up for the email list, take the survey, read the information that's on there, look at the previous sessions that we've had. We've got postcards and some other information. Take one of those with you. It's got a short URL for the website. Tell all your friends, tell all your enemies, to go to the website. We're going to try to have a little bit more of a presence. Now that there's some more activities outside, we're going to be at concerts on Wednesdays at Town Hall. We're going to be at the farmers market. We're going to be trying to contact, folks through the schools. What I discovered is that a lot of the sports seasons are like over already. It's been a long time since I was a kid. But next time there's a big baseball game in town, we're going to be out there, passing out literature. So that's all I have by way of presentation. As I said at the very beginning, if you've got general questions about the law, please ask them. If you've got specific questions about what our next steps are, please ask them. Anything that was in the presentation today, it's all up for grabs. So thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. It is almost 7:45, so that gives us a good 35 minutes at least of Q&A. So, sure. And one thing I'll say is, please stand up. You don't have to come to the front of the room. If you project towards this guy, he will grab you. Just don't whisper, and we should be all set.
Sure. Hi, my name is Brian O'Halloran, and I live off Central Ave T-Stop. That's what I consider ground zero for my wife and I, or that 1/2 mile blast radius. And it's interesting, it's the third meeting I've been to, and this is the first time that there's been no discussion of non-compliance. In fact, there's no slide here for non-compliance options. So my first question is, why was the slide removed? And the second question is, what exactly is the cost for non-compliance?
So it's a good question. We have talked about non-compliance at previous sessions. We've talked about it in other public meetings. We've talked about the planning board. Just to sort of, there are known consequences and there are unknown consequences, and then I'll talk about why we're not talking about it anymore. At least I'm not talking about it anymore. So I mentioned there are 3 grant programs that are laid out in the statute. So MassWorks is the big one. MassWorks is a infrastructure grant program, numbers in the tens of millions of dollars every year. And it's basically a grant program to build roads, build sidewalks, build pipes, tied to sort of economic development goals. Like I said, between $65 and $98 million a year go out to towns under this program. Town of Milton, in the 12 or so years of the program, has gotten, the town itself has received $1 million grant. The streetscape improvements on Elliott Street between Central Ave and Milton Village kind of paid for via a MassWorks grant. And then DCR through MassWorks has also gotten funds to do improvements at Hogan's Pond. So that's money that's been spent in the town of Milton. So the cost of the town is we won't be eligible for that grant program anymore. We have not been big players in that grant program in the past, but you know, it's sort of an opportunity that's foreclosed upon for assistance in doing what I think are probably necessary infrastructure improvements in the town. The other grant programs, Housing Choice is a grant program that is meant to incentivize and reward towns that do and meet housing production goals. We have not really met very many housing production goals. I think if every 40B that's been approved got built this year, we might kind of hit eligibility for Housing Choice, but that's probably not going to happen. So that has not been a really relevant grant program for us. And then the Local Capital Projects Fund is, again, this is a grant fund that is funded by casino revenues. And it's the one that is sort of the most opaque of the grant programs in the law. It actually functions through a line item that has been put in the budget for the past decade or so that has been in existence to supplement state subsidies to local housing authorities. So Milton Housing Authority gets a certain amount of money from the federal government. It gets a certain amount of money from rents from its tenants, and then it gets a certain amount of money from the state. And that chunk of money from the state is then further divided into money from the general fund and money from the local capital projects fund. It amounts to about 10% of the state subsidy to the housing authority. So that, you know, depending on the year, between $20,000 and $30,000 a year. So that's the thing that's probably most at risk right now, is if we're not compliant, the housing authority is going to have to find somewhere to get that money elsewhere. What I will say, and I don't know, you know, State House has not traditionally been forthcoming until 11:59 on the day before, but in terms of their budget, but I have heard a conversation about, well, you know, we've got this new, you know, cabinet level secretary for housing. They could probably use some funding. We may think about using the local capital projects fund to fund that secretariat, and then we'll figure out something else for the housing authorities. I don't know if that's the case. As of right now, you know, that's the risk for the town for non-compliance based on the statute. There are other factors. The governor has made statements about non-compliance. It's not an option, she has said. Now, what does that mean? That's up for grabs. I don't know what it means when she said that. The Attorney General has said that opting out of MBTA communities is not an option, and that she will issue a civil enforcement action against towns based on fair housing grounds if they don't comply. The thinking being that you know, here is an opportunity to open up the town to multifamily housing, which a lot of towns have not opened themselves up to over the past, which has significant impacts on affordability and access for people of lower income to access the town of Milton or Weston or Dover or Newton or wherever it is. And so there are fair housing applications. Now, again, what a civil enforcement action from the Attorney General looks like, what the implications are, you know, for, you know, what if we lose whatever that action is, I don't know. What I do know is that you don't want to be sued by the Commonwealth. And that non-compliance, you know, potentially sets us up for significant legal costs and significant, I don't know what other costs. You know, the unknowns become what is, if we don't comply and the state says you have to comply, what does that look like? And I don't know, but it looks worse than whatever we would come up with here. The reason why I'm not personally continuing to talk about non-compliance is A, I think we've gone over it. You know, if people are interested in talking, we can obviously talk here. But I think my perspective as a public servant is, you know, I'm a rule follower and I'm trying to help the town follow the rules. You know, if the Conservation Commission in the town of Milton issued an order of conditions on a development, and they went and just filled in a wetland, you know, Concom wouldn't just sit back and be like, oh, you know, they would use every power at their disposal to go after people who didn't comply with their regulations. You know, if the town of Milton decided that we didn't want to use the state mandated curriculum for schools, Department of Education or of elementary and secondary education wouldn't sit back and say, oh, there goes Milton. They would come after us. This is a state law. The law says that we shall have one of these districts. And so, what I am trying to do in, working with the planning board, working with the select board, working with our technical assistance providers is put the town in the best possible position to comply under the regulations that we have. And until my boss, town administrator, tells me to stop doing that, that's what I'm doing. That is a higher level conversation, what the town strategy towards compliance is going to be. That is something we've got elected officials in the room that they can take back to their boards and talk about that. But, my mission right now is there's a law, I've got to help the town follow that law. So, everyone at the same time. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, if you don't mind. Sorry, sir.
Can you just walk?
Could you stand up, please?
Sorry. Can you just walk through an imaginary home on an imaginary street that, let's say, is a 5,000 square foot lot that ends up being in the zone? What happens?
So this is, and when you get into sort of the nitty gritty of we're on a street and we're looking at a parcel. If you walk down LA Street, you'll see a lot of these, 5,000 to 6,000 square feet parcels. In a zoning district, that's for 7,500 square foot parcels. So these are already undersized. And the way that we've been approaching, the zoning is we want to minimize tear-downs, right? There's one thing that I've learned from being the assistant town planner for 3 years, being the director of planning for 3 years, and just sort of talking to people at public meetings and reading our planning documents, is that the physical character of the town of Milton is something that we are jealously guarded of. And we're not in a situation where, you've got Route 1 with a bunch of car dealerships and you can build giant apartment buildings on it, or, Dedham is rezoning Legacy Place, and they're all set. We don't have that. Our transit area is in the oldest and most old developed part of town, except for some other big houses out in the woods. And so when we talk about the physical character of the town of Milton, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about Milton. We're talking about all of the nice tree-lined streets, in the Columbines and off Elliott Street. And so to get to your point about, okay, what is the typical house in the transit area? What's going to happen? What do we want to happen is for that house not to be torn down for 3-decker, right? Now, I live in Dorchester. I don't have a problem. I love a 3-decker, but there's a reason why we don't have a lot of these in Milton, because there's another physical character that we wanted our housing to look like. And so the way that you sort of approach that from a zoning perspective is, I'll give you a couple examples, right? The initial inputs that we put into the compliance model, aside from the density and aside from the minimum lot size, are really attempting to reflect the existing zoning requirements. So 10-foot setbacks on the side. I have a cheat sheet on my desk, so I don't have to remember this stuff. I should bring it with me. But the front setbacks, the rear setbacks, all maintain the same. We've tried to maintain the same height limits. So 2.5 stories, I think 35 feet is the height limits. And so the way this manifests itself, if you were to want to build a 3-family house, I'll give you another sort of great example, right? If you look at, you might not be able to tell when you walk down the street, but if you look at it on the map, it's clear as day that a typical 5,000 square foot lot is going to have a 50-foot frontage, right? So that's the lot line that's along the street. And if you were to build a house, and a lot of these houses are 35, 40 feet wide, right? If you got smaller than that, you could live in a house like that, but it would be tough. You probably wouldn't want to build it. A lot of these houses have a driveway, and it either goes back into a garage in the back, or you park on the side of your house. And so consequently, the house is kind of shifted on its lot. So it's not compliant for setbacks because it's only got a 5-foot setback on one side and then 15 feet on the other. And that 15 feet is where your driveway is. So if we were to set zoning requirements that kind of reflect the existing zoning, 10-foot setbacks, 1 parking space per unit, and you are a property owner, or you're looking to buy a piece of property and you want to build a 3-family house under the new zoning, your incentive, if you've got to build one parking space for every unit, so you got to have 3 parking spaces. You don't want to lose that driveway. Because if you were to tear down that house, you would need to take it from being shifted to one side of the lot, putting it in the middle of the lot. And you can't run that driveway in that little 10-foot space between the house and the property line. So your incentive immediately is to maintain the existing footprint, right? And what that means is you do an addition on the back. Maybe you dormer out the roof to put a unit in the attic. The existing footprint hopefully remains. And that's what we're trying to do, is to sort of set up these requirements so that the possibility or the probability of a tear down and a new construction is lessened, right? Let me just say one thing real quick is, this is what we're trying to do. With the buy right zoning scheme, if someone wants to knock down the house and they think they can squeeze a driveway in, they might be able to do it. It's just, as I said earlier, getting it right at the outset becomes really important. But again, we have the ability to, if we only want buildings to be 35 feet tall with a peaked roof, 2.5 stories, and we can do it.
I really appreciate all that, but maybe from my perspective, let's say I own this house, what happens to me the year after the zoning goes in place?
Do you want to redevelop your house? If you had the ability tomorrow to build a 3-family house.
Let's say I put my house on the market 10 years later.
So this becomes then.
Can you explain that nothing is required to be built?
Yeah, so let me tee up the answer
That's really
with this, and I appreciate that. So when we say this is a zoning mandate, what it means is we hand the state zoning, and they check all the boxes and they say, your zoning is compliant. We're good, right? And if a single unit of housing never gets built, we're still good. Now, that probably won't happen, but we are not required to actually produce any housing, right? I think we want to produce housing because we have a crisis in affordability and we've got all these things, but we're not required to actually compel anyone to do anything. So 10 years from now, you are in a zone that can allow a 3-family house. It depends on what your values are. It really does. So if you are in a position where, it's more important for you, for the town of Milton, to maintain a 1-family character, you sell your house to someone who wants to live in a 1-family house. And there's plenty of people that want to do that. All right. 1-family house in the town of Milton is like, I don't know, what's a really precious thing. It's the most, it's better than a diamond, like 10 diamonds. People want that, right? So you will find a buyer. Under a zoning scheme where it's possible to build a 3-family house on a 5,000 square foot lot, there is also a buyer out there that will want to build a 3-family house. And it really depends on you. Will you get more money for one or the other? It depends. Do you want to leave a 1-family house or do you want to leave a 3-family house? So really it becomes up to the individual property owner. And it's actually a question, did we add it already to the survey, or we've added that question to our survey, and it's a little bit of a loaded or unloaded question because, who knows what people want to do, but we want to ask people like, look, if you had the opportunity to redevelop your house, would you do it? What are our results on that? Josh will give us the results in a minute, but it's just one thing that we wanted to know. And I don't know what we'll do with this information, but it's just good to know that, like, what is the appetite for this sort of thing, among people? Because the state is asking us, they're more than asking us, they're making us do it. But like, do people actually want to redevelop?
The appetite from the survey respondents we've received is very low. Over 75% of the people who have said they live and own a house in Milton, if it was redeveloped or rezoned, would they want to redevelop it? 76% of them said no, thank you. And that's not in conflict with us following the law.
Right. And so the implications are like, you still got your kids are in the schools, you don't want to sell your house. So this is why, like, when we talk about what is the time frame for build out, like, not everyone is going to want to sell their house at the same time. So like, you're actually going to see quite a bit of stability regardless of what we do, I think.
For decades.
I'm not going to speculate on the time frame now.
No, exactly. No.
So I said 1 and then I already lost 2. You, sir, yes, I'm sorry.
Well, my question is this: if we're going to end up opening ourselves up to this exposure, because, to have multi-family houses and things of that nature. What are our opportunities right now to go and get better services here in the town of Milton from the, relative services and everything else? To get better busing and get some additional bus lines through here that we can actually commute through the town of Milton, not be car required. So you gotta take this, so opening up this exposure, what avenues does that give us to go out and get better services from the community rails and those things?
So it's a great question, and I think there are implications at the state level and at the local level. And just in case the owl didn't pick it up, just the question of, we do the zoning, what's the opportunity for better services from the state in terms of transit and whatnot. One thing that I'll say is, and again, nobody wants the T to be failure, right? Nobody wants the T to be the state that it's in right now, which is really not that good. Whether there's the political will to make those improvements is sort of up for grabs. But one thing that in my experience as a planner that's always been true is that the T follows the demand. The T doesn't create the demand, right? The exception to that rule is probably the Green Line extension in Somerville, which is they've expanded service into areas where there wasn't service. It's an exception because it's actually the feds required the T to build that as mitigation for the big dig. It wasn't just, we're going to build a new line out to nowhere and see what happens. In almost every case, the T sees a demand for its service and expands its service there. The T is actually in the middle of a bus redesign of their entire bus network, and is predicated upon research, analysis, outreach to sort of determine what is the demand for our services and where are we not meeting it. And so it's not a great answer, but the answer is, if we build more and if Milton grows and the demand for transit service increases, the only way you're going to get better service is to be able to say, look at all these people waiting for the 240 bus. Look at all the people that are sitting here at the platform at Milton Station. We need more service. It becomes a political question, right? The T is saddled with big dig debt, and not a lot of legislators actually take the T to work every morning, and so they don't know how bad it is, right? So it becomes, a multi-pronged effort to say, we need better service. What I guess what I'm saying is, you have to have the numbers to back it up in order to say we need more bus service, we need more train service. On the local level, what I'll say, and I can prepare some information for a future presentation, is that what I think we're going to find in this fiscal analysis that we do is that multifamily housing is a net revenue generator for the town. The biggest taxpayer in town is 88 Wharf Street. We made $1 million from 88 Wharf Street last year. And you saw how many school children, came out of that building. And obviously, they're turning on their water and, there are ambulance calls, but overall, that multifamily building is a net revenue gain for the town. And so I think that's going to bear out for additional multifamily housing. And so that becomes a situation where, if the town is making more money, how can the town make things better for its residents, right? I think another thing that, has to do with that is, we are in a world where a lot of people are still commuting to work. A lot of people are not commuting to work. They're either working from home or they're coming up with alternative arrangements. And I think this is something that becomes really important for, say, East Milton or Milton Village and Central Ave, where folks who otherwise may have been commuting downtown and getting that downtown experience, got a cup of coffee, going out for drinks after work, yada, yada, yada. They want to find that stuff at home now. And so really kind of improving and boosting those amenities in town via land use regulation like zoning, again, becomes really important, where it becomes, your ability to get to the Star Market on River Street becomes less important if you've got a, Stop and Shop. It's another grocery store, in your neighborhood. Now, I'm not saying you're going to build a Stop and Shop anywhere, but that becomes a thing where, transit becomes less important, transportation becomes less important, when the amenities are kind of closer at hand. That's not something that's necessarily a part of this zoning effort, although it could be. But it is a general conversation about land use regulation. So it's the $1 million question for every community. Everyone wants better T service. And it's political as much as anything else. So, you know, call your representatives also. I did one, two, three.
Hi, I'm Ellen Denier. I have a question and a comment. The first question is there a timing for the UTL studies and when you might have some graphics to show?
So we, it's sort of like a domino effect. And our project manager at MABC was on vacation last week. So he's playing catch up this week. But they are doing kind of like that additional analysis on additional sub-districts and where they're going to pass off to UTL, and they're going to use that to kind of develop some of their visualizations for, okay, these are the dimensional requirements you're doing in this area. Here's what this stuff's going to look like. We are trying to get that stuff done by mid-July. We actually have sort of a deadline of the end of June. We're probably going to get an extension of that through our technical assistance contract, but not that much longer. So I'm hoping that we have something in our hands in July.
Great. And my comment is we moved to Milton because of the trolley. I used to be in downtown. I think the transit is really important. And we live in power lines, walk to the trolley. I am really in favor of developing multifamily housing. And what's interesting to me is as you walk around, you start to see that there are 2-family houses. They're pretty well concealed. And I think if they were 3-family, they could be equally well concealed. And I think that walkability is really important. Affordability is really important. We're empty nesters. If we wanted to sell our house and stay in Milton, there's no place we can go, right? Every place that is multifamily is $1 million and up. So we would have to leave the town. I think this gives the town a real opportunity. And I will say our next door neighbors were selling their house, and I thought, well, if the zoning were in place, somebody could buy that property and they could build a 3-family. Would it be the end of the world? No. I mean, we have 2-family houses here and there. We have single-family houses. I really think it's a great thing, and I think we should be supporting it.
Yeah, I think especially to that point, you know, there are solutions to the sort of the physical character question. There's 3-family houses all over town. They're a little bit bigger than a normal house, but they're not, like, we can figure out a way to like preserve the physical character of town. It's, you know, when we talk about sort of the fiscal impact type stuff and sort of the other physical impacts of, you know, when you densify, when you put more people on the same area of land, you know, what is the traffic going to be like? You know, how many more ambulances are going to come? This is the stuff that, like, I'm so confident that the physical stuff is, you know, we can create design standards, we can create form-based codes, you know, we can make it look real nice. It's just sort of figuring out what are the other downstream implications of density that we can figure out. So I definitely appreciate that comment. Sir, I'm sorry you were last, but you're up.
Okay. I've got a mixture of questions and comments. I'll try to get through it quickly. This whole thing, Chris Tracus from Meadowview Road in Milton, first of all. This needs to be thought out and considered carefully. I don't think people should jump to a yes or a no. Okay, I mean, I'm leaning to the no side of possible no. I want to be honest up front, but I want to consider things, okay? Perhaps there are parts of this that could be helpful. More study and analysis is needed. I think we need to get the non-compliance discussion back on the table, because this is not a law that any city or town must comply with. Several cities and towns have already decided they're not going to do this. Okay, so we don't have to comply. Maybe we will. Maybe it'd be good to comply with it. Who knows? But I think that discussion has to get back on the table. There are financial incentives in this to comply, of course. Milton is on a strong financial footing. I don't think these financial incentives for something that needs to guide us. We don't need the money. Milton's in a good position. You know, I mean, it's nice to always have more money, but Milton's in a strong financial position. I've talked to many people in the town who are either not in favor of this or maybe are in favor of a scaled down version. What they say is it's simply too big in scope. I mean, I personally am not in favor of the scenario where 2,500 apartment and condo units are going to be built. I mean, we're not a rapid transit community like Somerville, Cambridge, etc. We're something else. I mean, the Mattapan line is not a rapid transit. It ends, you have to get off, you have to reboard at Ashmont. It's just not. And I think that's something we should pursue on this. Now, these 2,500 units, where are they going to go? Suppose, you know, maybe you're not going to get 800 people that want to tear down their houses and have something built there. I mean, what is the town going to do? Take these houses by eminent domain? People have memories in these houses. They're going to go in and say, well, you know, sorry, yeah, you raise a family there. Gotta go. We're taking it by eminent domain. Sorry. So what's going to happen? Are you going to have, 125 unit condo and apartment buildings for these 2,500 units? Even then, you'd have to tear down hundreds of nice looking, well kept up single family homes. I mean, where is all this going to go? And as I said, if people don't want to sell, we're going to take it by eminent domain. And there's going to be years of disruption to that Elliott Street neighborhood, noise, dust, construction vehicles, the parking. I mean, Milton is a town because people like it as a town. That's why a lot of people came here. Not everybody wants to live in a city. I mean, I don't want to live in a city. There's a certain level of peace and tranquility in a town that some people like me and many others like. I mean, we need both cities and towns because people need both and people have different tastes and they want different choices. You know, and Milton right now has many residents that can't afford to live here anymore. I mean, maybe there's parts of this that could help people stay here. You know, the kids can't stay here. Maybe the parents can stay. The kids can't stay. You know, they're moving to, they used to move to the southwest and southeast Florida. They can't go there anymore. Those places have become expensive. They used to have people that they know down there. You know, southwest Florida was like a little Massachusetts. They can't go there. Now they're going to North Carolina, South Carolina, Arkansas, Tennessee, where they don't know anybody. You know, let's try to maybe find parts of this that can help people who grew up here, you know, maybe moved here 10, 15 years ago. They can't afford to stay. Their kids can't afford to stay. Let's see if we can find some ideas from that to help. That's our way of helping. Try to do something like that. I mean, and again, you know, I know there's a housing crisis, but in other parts of the state, there's a housing crisis of a different kind. People are leaving. The western part of the state's losing people. The congressional district in the west keeps moving east because they're losing people. They have to pick up population. You know, there's other things that can be done to help. Maybe try to help people realize that some of these underutilized areas of the state are okay. So you know, I'm not saying do nothing, but at least bring back discussions of non-compliance, and let's see what we can do to help people from Milton that have been here, that are leaving, that want to stay, but they just can't stay. So anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I just want to, and I didn't hear a question there, but that's fine. I can respond to a couple of those comments, but I do want to get to some other folks. One thing I want to say is there's no, eminent domain has nothing to do with any of this, okay? Our pursuit of compliance is strictly, it's paper, all right? So we're trying to create zoning that checks all the boxes that the state has. The town is not interested, not being asked to, not being compelled to take any property, do any development on its own, compel any property owner to make any decision beyond their own personal property decision. So eminent domain doesn't factor into this at all. As I said earlier, if we pass compliant zoning and not a single unit gets built, we are still in compliance. Okay, so I just want to assuage people's concern. We get this every now and again. I just want to make sure people understand that there is no interest or mandate on the town to actually take property and build on it. And then, you know, I think a lot of your points are well taken. I think that, you know, it's just important to keep in mind that, you know, Milton is a town that is right in the center of the core of the sort of economic engine of the region. And sort of that's where the requirement to build more housing comes from. You know, one of the reasons why Western Mass is losing population is because that's not where the jobs are. The jobs are here. And, you know, it's not, it might not be fair, but it's also a decision that has its roots in a lot of other downstream decisions about how the Massachusetts economy is going to work. And Milton is right in the middle of it. And a lot of the things that make Milton a really great place are a function of its proximity to the city of Boston. And so I think what our approach as a department of trying to sort of guide this process of writing zoning is identify the things that are important to the people of Milton and accommodate those things and make sure that those values are reflected as much as possible in whatever zoning we write. As it relates to the conversation about non-compliance, you know, this is an issue that is now above my head. I think that I still have, you know, a charge to, you know, pursue compliance with this law, and to help the town get to a point where by the end of the year, we have compliant zoning and we don't get, you know, knocked around by the state. You know, until I'm told not to do that, that's going to be part of my job. This is now, it's a political conversation in the town of Milton. We have elected leaders in the room right now that are hearing all of this, and they're gonna take this back. This is a standing item on the planning board's agenda. I've been, you know, setting up a regular schedule of updates to the select board. And so, you know, it's, you know, I'm gonna do my best to follow the law until my boss tells me not to. And that's it's kind of a crack answer, but that's what I'm doing. So Dick, and then,
This gentleman.
Oh, sorry.
I'll be quick on that.
We'll move back.
all right, you know, you first and then Dick, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, sorry.
So first off, I'd like to thank you for putting this forum together. I think you're gonna put the town in a good position. And you guys have been doing a great job. So I just feel like I need to sort of dispel the notion that it's just gonna be 3-family houses. Because, you know, I've gone into the models and I've sort of drawn the districts. I mean, you're gonna have to have higher density than that somewhere. And so in my opinion, I think it really just, it all comes down to the sub-districts. You know, where's the meat and potatoes of this really gonna be? And I think we need to do everything we can as a town to make sure that, you know, that we have decent, higher density areas where you can actually have affordable housing. Because, you know, there's not gonna be a requirement for, you know, your 2, your 3 family, you know, we don't wanna have 40B backsliding, if you will. So where we can go high, I think there are some sort of slam dunk cases where it makes sense. I think we should get credit for areas like 88 Wharf where we have already zoned it for high, right? Let's just go crazy there to get credit for what we already have. I mean, let's play the game. Reclassification, I believe, should be on the table. I think that's an honest conversation that the town should have, right? We're not classified as rapid transit as part of the law. That's part of the guidelines. So the guidelines are designed to provide us and our leaders some flexibility here. This should be a back and forth process with the state. So to our elected leaders in the room, to the select board, you know, please, let's have that conversation. Everything should be on the table. According to the Milton Times today, the MBTA Mattapan line improvement is 8 to 10 years out. So, you know, that's on the table, right? We should just believe that that's going to happen. We need to be planners. This gets into my question, our timeline. believe that the timeline that we are currently working under for a winter town meeting is a bit of a joke. I think this process needs to be deliberate, inclusive, we need to get everyone's voice, and I just do not believe that we have enough time here to get to a good product, a good finish line. So I think, you know, a non-compliance in good faith saying we don't have enough time. I mean, have you had any conversations about an extension? Can you talk about what the timeline looks like right now? You know, I'm concerned that we're not going to have a finished product and that this is going to get messed up because we don't have enough time.
So thank you. That was awesome. Thank you. Again, good comments. I think you hit on a lot of really good points there. We are doing our best to crank up the density in areas where A, we already have it, and B, it actually kind of makes sense from a sort of physical kind of standpoint. So, you know, one thing that's going to be important is, you know, getting those results back from our technical assistance providers and seeing, you know, do we need to crank it up more, or have we reached a level where it's appropriate? I think the question about the timeline, I share your concerns about the timeline. I really do. And I've said before at these public meetings that, you know, we need to do our best, and we have, you know, technically a tick-tock of steps that we could hit a December town meeting for. Is it realistic? It's ambitious. And really it's driven by the state. I would not want to do the biggest rezoning that the town of Milton has ever done over the course of, you know, 12 months. I want to take more time with it. What I have said is, and I think I'm going to use this in the future, so thank you. You know, non-compliance of good faith. And I've said something as much in the past where I would much rather, you know, help the town get it right than get something to the finish line by the deadline. And I think that's where, you know, that demonstration of good faith is like, look, you're giving us a lot of technical assistance money, we're using it, we're churning away, we're having all these meetings. Because ultimately, you know, if you look at, you know, I look at other towns, I look at, you know, Tewksbury and Ipswich and all these other towns that are sort of on a 2-year deadline. And the stuff that they're doing from an engagement perspective is like, it's awesome. You know, they're holding people's hands, they're having all of these like really in-depth sessions on different zoning issues. Whereas our timeline is frantically just running through this compliance model. And I'll tell you, like, it hasn't been as much planning as I like to do it, as much as it's been chasing the numbers that are going to get us to compliance. And so, you know, we are going to hit a point where, you know, I think putting something on the table that is compliant, that we can then start to mold and start to kind of sink our teeth into and sort of ask those questions of, is this appropriate? Does this meet our values? Is this density where it needs to be? Is going to be how we have that sort of more in-depth conversation. And if it happens by a December town meeting, then great. But I think, you know, if we reach, you know, January 1, 2024, we don't have a zoning district, you know, I think our argument to the state is like, look at all the work we've done. You know, look at what we're trying to do here. And then, you know, I think the demonstration of that hard work will hopefully buy us, you know, the good graces of the state. Because I think ultimately, I don't think the state is interested in jamming anyone up. I think they want to see this law succeed. I think they want to see towns succeed. And, you know, they have set really ambitious timelines. Quite frankly, we probably have the least number of resources of any of the rapid transit communities. I mean, Brookline is a town meeting community just like us, and they have a staff of, I mean, Josh is the best ever, but they have like 4 Joshes, you know, and a lot more money.
Can we hear the last couple comments?
Yeah, we got plenty of minutes.
We're running out of time. A couple of.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
Sure.
Just one comment and one question. Comment is, I agree with the previous speaker that I don't think compliance should be something that's given. The town meeting members who are going to have the final voice in this should give serious consideration to saving the character and history of the town. Joining Middleborough and the 6 other towns that have rejected it so far, and possibly Brookline, which has a massive grassroots campaign underway now, a fantastic website, Brookline by Design. Their town meeting is gonna be voting in December, the same as us. The 7 towns that already rejected it, plus Milton and Brookline rejected it, and just make our own development plans on a reasonable scale that people can agree with, rather than shoveling 2,600 new dense cruise ship like buildings onto Elliott Street. It's something that should be, we should welcome that.
We don't have to do that. We don't want to
Do what?
put cruise ships on Elliott Street.
Well, that's what they have in Forest Hills and every place else near T stations. But anyway, no, I'm an attorney. I don't specialize in real estate or housing. My specialty is tax and securities litigation. I did litigate constitutional cases in the Superior Court, the Federal Court, the Federal Appeals Court early in my career. And my thoughts revert to the Obamacare health care challenge, where the mandate, the healthcare mandate, was accompanied by a penalty. And the Supreme Court ruled that the mandate was legal only because of the penalty, which the government had the ability to impose in the form of a tax. I think this act is very similar. They've got a mandate and they've got a penalty for non-compliance, which would be a tax on the town in the form of waiver of grants, which you said in your first online hearing that I watched. You did the math on it, it came out to about $244,000 a year would be the amount of grants the town would lose out on if we didn't comply. Now, I don't know how much it would cost to double all the school buildings, the teachers and administrators, salaries and benefits, the library, the senior center, to accommodate these 2,600 new units of housing. But it seems like that $244,000 penalty would be a good choice to make instead of complying. Now, that's my comment. My question is, as far as Section 8 affordable housing, it's my understanding that that is calculated on 10% of the housing stock in a community. So if this goes through, you get 2,600 new apartments and condos. I assume we're going to create a window by right for 260 more units of affordable housing, in addition to this MBTA communities housing that's going to be created by right. We're going to get another almost 300 units of affordable housing that's going to be shoved in against neighbors' wishes all across town. And maybe you can answer that one.
So just to, on the affordable housing issue, we are allowed to include up to a 10% affordability requirement on multifamily housing under the zoning to kind of keep up with our 40B obligations. But if we want to stay above 10%, you know, we're going to have to be deliberate about it because we're not going to be able to zone for more than 10%. And so if, you know, we're at, you know, depending on the timeline, we're at between 5 and 6% right now. We're going to have to deliberately build affordable housing. I'm not going to go through all your comments because I think we have one more, but thank you for coming and I appreciate that.
And your name is Stella. I think it would be really great. I work in the field of property management and portfolio management, and I think because where be around quite a bit, I think it would be really helpful if you actually had a meeting and had people here to discuss what 40B is, what affordable housing is, what the 10% rule is, what the tax credit entails, what the tax credit limits are, how high they go, the 80, the 50, the 60, the 90, I think it's 120, it's been a while. And then the project base. I think people don't know, you throw affordable housing, everyone thinks, oh, great, everyone can afford to live there. It's not how that works. And I think it would be really helpful to have that discussion specifically on that issue of affordable housing and 40Bs, what the 10% means. It's usually 10% of the whole building, so we have the in those units. So I'd like to see that happen. I haven't seen
Tom's on the affordable housing.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to do it now, but.
that. So I get it, but I think it needs to be,
We've done a couple, there's a nonprofit called Affordable Inclusive Milton that has done a session right in this room on some of those topics. I agree that there needs to be more education.
because I think from affordable housing around, people think it's all affordable housing, and it's not, and that's true.
Well, 40B is 3/4 market rate like that. Right, 75.
Right, so that means that most people can't afford to live here, and that's the truth of that story.
Right, but if we
Only
build-
10%.
we don't build more housing, yeah, we'll get worse.
But no, but you're missing my point. You have 10% keep going around affordable housing, but it's not really affordable.
So-
And even some of the tax credits are not affordable. They're
So what I'll just say is this, that the MBTA communities law is not specifically about affordable housing, capital A, affordable housing, subsidized, deed restricted. It's about increasing housing supply throughout the region.
Then why do you keep calling affordable housing?
I don't think I do. I
You've
think
been calling 40P.
Separate issue.
we're gonna have to agree to disagree about what I've said. So until someone comes down and kicks us out, Dick,
I'll be quick. They're very hard acts to follow here, but well, I'm not here to debate or really talk about the need for housing, rental housing in the greater Boston area. What I am going to talk about a little bit and very quickly is about Milton's responsibility. The way I understand it is that the 25% quota given to us by the MBTA is based upon the trolley basically going through Milton, which I think is about 1 mile to go through Milton. And looking at, having grown up in Milton, I've never been to Cable Street before, I've never been to Valley Road. And I realized that there's no parking there. There's no parking in Central Avenue. The only real parking is in Milton Landing. And the last couple of times I've been down there, and Josh has done some research down there, there's been 8 or 9 cars. So when you look at, one of the questions I have is, we have about a mile going through actually Milton, makes the trolley a little bit different. How many riders actually ride, do we think, from these stations?
I was trying to shut down the computer. Josh has that number.
Do you have?
Yeah, it's in the presentation. And we can pull the specific station ridership numbers
Right.
and send them out after the meeting, because that was part of the
All right,
day.
what I have here is the 67 people get on a day at Caitlin Street, 42 at Valley Road, Central Avenue, about 750 is split between Boston and Milton Station, about 300 people. So we're talking an awful lot of responsibility for not an awful lot of service from the MBTA right now. And I'm a little, having been able to experience the MBTA, the trolley for 4 years going to high school, I'm not particularly overwhelmed by the MBTA and that service. So I think that when we talk about, Tim, I think you talked about this in terms of the classification. I think this gentleman did. I think the MBTA itself said there were 3 categories. There's heavy rail, which is red line, orange line, and blue line, light rail, which is the green line, and then the trolley, which is Mattapan, which by far is the least used of all those traffic lines.
So I think the ridership, so the actual service of the trolley notwithstanding, which I think we have data on, and then we also have our own kind of observations of, we've seen those cars smash into each other and everything like that. The ridership is really driven by the land use, right? And the reason why not a lot of people get on at Capon Street is not a lot of people live at Capon Street. And so that's what a lot of this legislation is trying to get after, is there is capacity on this line. These cars are not full from Mattapan to Ashmont.
And I haven't been for years.
Because nobody, I don't want to say no one lives on Capon Street, because people obviously live on Capon Street, but relative to Milton Landing, where you have multiple multifamily buildings, or, Mattapan Square, where you have, a densely populated neighborhood, you know, the ridership is not there because, you know, even if everyone that lived on Capon Street got on a T, you would still have capacity.
Where do I, if I live in another part of Milton and want to get on the T, where do I park my car?
You know, Dick, I think you don't, right? And so that becomes,
Okay, my bicycle.
you actually could, yes, you could.
Yeah, but-
So the goal of this legislation is not necessarily to sort of get people who are already here to the T, because that's a transit question. It's like, all right, you know, the 240 bus goes to Ashmont, or, you know, it passes by Central Ave, and, you know, maybe you do whatever. Like, how do you get people to the T? The question. This gets people to the T by putting houses on top of the stations. And so it's not you that's getting to the T from your house. It's the new guy that lives in this new
Okay.
apartment getting there.
Okay, then one other quick comment, it has to do with the school-age children. If one of the things as part of the master plan we talked about is alternative housing opportunities for Milton, especially talking about empty nesters, for example, which I'm one. So I leave my 4-bedroom house and move into one of these apartments that are gonna be built. Who's buying my house? That person coming in with no children or coming in with 3 or 4 children?
They're probably coming in with 3 or 4 children.
That's exactly.
Well,
So a net gain of two children per house, right? Which is gonna affect the schools, which is gonna affect where we're gonna put the schools, which we're going through right now. So,
No, and Dick, it's a very well taken point. You know, this is the thing that's driving our enrollment right now. Is, you know, we haven't built a ton of new housing. It's older people who have more housing than they need moving out, and people following them. So, you know, whether we build a single multifamily unit or not, that number of school children is going to fluctuate based on who's living in the housing right now. So I think, you know, the school issue is not an issue that lives or dies based on multifamily housing. It's an issue that goes into, you know, are we going to build a new school, and how do we do it? Where's it going to go? You know, it goes into what are our future land use decisions that kind of incentivize the type of development that.
or if we're developing opportunities for empty nesters, which is part of the master plan, I think was part of what we talked about and other discussions about this. Isn't that what it's all about? I mean, we're taking people out of their homes, giving them opportunities, which opens up the housing stock for people to move in.
Yeah.
Which increases the school age population.
I guess what I would contend is that that's going to happen regardless of whether we build multifamily housing or not. So
You're accelerating.
I mean, is it accelerating, or is it just people that if you want to move out of your house in the town of Milton, you're going to go where there's a new house for you, whether it's Canton or Florida or wherever. I think the value that's expressed in the housing production plan is people want to stay in Milton, they should have a chance to stay in Milton. I think it's taken as a given that eventually people are going to want to cash out of their houses and move somewhere, and they're either in town or out of town. So I'm not disputing the point. What I'm saying is you're describing a dynamic that happens regardless of whether there's a place for people to land in Milton.
There's a question of how fast it's happening.
I mean, there may be some truth to the fact that it accelerates, but I don't have data around it.
Quite frankly. If there's a need, we're saying there's a need for empty nesters to stay in the town of Milton. We're providing opportunities for people, right?
But that's kind of assuming the market for the new housing is Milton existing, right? And that's, I don't think, the case. But
Oh, there's something that can move into Milton.
Right.
Buying my house, but I'm staying in Milton.
Just the thing.
You're coming into Milton, occupying the new apartments or condos that are built through this law.
Well, I'm buying the new one.
That is one scenario.
That is one scenario.
What I'm saying is there's another scenario where somebody from JP or Canton or whatever buys the new unit or rents the new unit.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about.
Well, I think that's the majority of people that are going to live in those new apartments. Don't currently reside in them.
That means we're also talking about that this pent up demand is carrying for a while.